House may come to order.
Okay, welcome back everyone to the St Andrews Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Yeah!
I'm going to make you do it again. Welcome to the St Andrews Union Debating Society, the oldest and some might say finest of its kind.
Yeah!
I've really missed making you all do that every week. The motion that stands before the House this evening is that this House believes that that traditional theatre is elitist. Christ. Yes, clearly. It's a very special evening this evening because we are collaborating with Mermaids, so big thank you for them for helping to make this event happen this evening. So I'm delighted to welcome some excellent speakers. On the proposition we have Miya Turner and Charlotte Rabiei. And on the opposition we have Connaughton and Ava Daniels. So before we begin the debate this evening, I would like to invite the Clerk of the House, Lewis O'Neill, to read last week's minutes in the sort of style of / excerpt from The Merchant of Venice.
All that glitters is not gold. Often have you heard that told. Many a man has life hath sold, but my outside to behold.
No one knows what that means, Lewis.
Counterpoint, come on now, we're in St Andrews, of course everybody knows what that means.
Ooh, there seems to be some disagreement in the House. We shall have to take a vote by oral acclamation. All those in favour of taking the minutes as read, say aye.
Aye.
All those against, nay.
Nay.
It seems rather close. I shall have to consult with my sergeant. Ian?
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are taken as read.
Resign.
Don't tempt me. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to invite the first proposition speaker, Miya Turner, to begin tonight's debate. Hear, hear!
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am very grateful to have been asked to speak on this motion. As a former theatre kid myself, this debate has interested me greatly. Indeed, what is debating if not a form of theatre that switches learning lines for learning facts and niche arguments? I'd like to start my speech by explaining what is meant by the key terms in the motion before moving on to how traditional theatre meets the burden of elitism. What is traditional theatre? We believe that traditional theatre is that which has a long and established history. This can include content like Shakespearean tragedies, Greek plays, or works by well-known playwrights like Andrew Lloyd Webber. Any work of theatre can become traditional. We believe that this has been accomplished when a work becomes a household name and has a long run on Broadway, the West End, or similar venues for performing arts around the world. For example, The Phantom of the Opera, A Streetcar Named Desire, and Les Mis have been around for long enough that they are known by most people and have influenced the theatrical world around them, thus creating their own traditions, meaning they can be considered traditional. In contrast, non-traditional theatre looks like new plays. Examples include Operation Mincemeat with Dear England. What needs to be true then for traditional theatre to be considered elitist? It firstly needs to be true that traditional theatre is accessed differently by people from different backgrounds, and secondly, it needs to be true that the industry is internally dominated by people from elite parts of society. The first part of this case will explain why people from less economically privileged backgrounds are literally unable to access traditional theatre. The second part of my case will explain why, even when everyone is physically able to access traditional theatre, there still exists an elitist divide between how different groups experience the content that they are viewing. I'd like to start by characterising a little bit what the state of current arts funding looks like. Governments across the world have made significant cuts to art funding. This can be due to global economic issues like persistent inflation or high borrowing costs, which mean many governments are looking to cut back on their spending. Arts funding is often the first thing on the chopping block, as it's not considered as essential as things like healthcare or defence spending. But even if countries are economically succeeding, the global rise of populist leaders provides another threat to arts funding, which is often portrayed as a woke waste of central government funds. This means that subsidies for theatres are in general just being removed across the board and across the world. There has also been a trend of personal cutbacks on entertainment spending, the result of high inflation which has hit household budgets and reduced people's ability to justify spending on wants rather than needs. People are much more likely to spend money on entertainment like streaming services, which offer a cheaper and easier way to consume content than attending physical theatrical performances. All of this means that theatres are in a highly precarious financial situation, and so they will always try to make the most amount of money possible from their ticket sales. This is not just a matter of preference, but a matter of literal survival for a lot of these theatrical industries. If opposition wants to talk about theatres that currently offer relatively low prices for accessing this content, notice that the issues I've just outlined are not likely to go away. It is incredibly likely that unfavourable conditions for the performing arts will continue into the future, making it likely that tickets for traditional theatre will continue to get more expensive. That is to say, even if they are comparatively low now, there exists a sort of plethora of reasons why they are likely to increase in expense into the future. Why then do theatres make tickets for traditional theatre more expensive than those for newer shows? Firstly, they do this to create a sense of exclusivity. The most stable and reliable audience for traditional theatre has always been those from economically privileged backgrounds. Theatres have started to cater to this audience, specifically by offering very high ticket prices which create a sense of exclusivity and make theatre trips into something of a status symbol. This exclusivity is a hallmark of luxury brands who also try to cater to this audience. People with money, consciously or subconsciously, regularly like to feel as though they have things which other people do not. It is easier to see why rich audiences are more preferable for theatres to cater towards. They are likely to spend more money at theatre bars and restaurants, more likely to become patrons of the theatre by making charitable donations, and much more likely to be repeat customers of the services that theatre offers. These actions create cyclical exclusion of certain groups. When people with less money are unable to afford tickets, it means that it is vanishingly unlikely that theatres will ever put on productions of traditional pieces of theatre in poor areas, because they have no evidence that local populations will find this interesting or appealing. The second reason why tickets for traditional theatre is more expensive is because the presence of very famous actors often makes upselling seem justified. Very famous Hollywood names want to come and work in pieces of theatre that are guaranteed to have an audience and be relatively comfortable. For example, traditional theatre is much more likely to be stationed in one location rather than going on a draining tour of the country, making it a much more attractive form of art for these people to come and participate in. For example, at this very moment in London, Jonathan Bailey is starring in Richard II, Tom Hiddleston in Much Ado About Nothing, and Sigourney Weaver in The Tempest. Tickets for these performances are extremely pricey because they feature a big name which creates a lot of excitement and interest in the production. In contrast, newer forms of media often have actors who have not yet made a massive big break in Hollywood, meaning that there is less of a justification for theatres to upsell on these tickets to the extent that they are able to do with traditional forms of media. That is why these tickets are especially high, even given the context of these theatres struggling financially. How do the physical spaces where traditional theatre take place exacerbate elitism? Traditional theatre takes place in grand venues which are to be found almost exclusively in capital cities and in major metropolitan hubs. For example, the Lyceum in Edinburgh, the National Theatre and the Shakespeare Globe in London. Traditional theatre is very rarely performed in smaller, more local theatrical venues because, firstly, as already explained, this is just considered to be too much of a risk by theatre producers who do not know if there is an interest in the population that this production would be catering towards. But secondly, just performing in grand spaces helps to build a culture of exclusivity and status that I previously explained is so useful for these theatres to cultivate. This means that there is a huge bias of access towards certain geographical areas. People in the southeast of England, for example, are just much more able to access this traditional theatre than those from northern parts of England. It is no coincidence that this divide aligns with the average distribution of personal wealth in these regions. Thus, the geography of theatre provides yet another barrier to access, strengthening the case that this form of media is elitist. Let me now explain why traditional theatre is still elitist, even if opposition prove totally equal access to this content between different groups. That is to say, even if they want to talk predominantly about forms of media like recorded bits of traditional theatre that people can access online, why is it still elitist for people who consume it? Why is having a specific education necessary for you to engage with and enjoy traditional theatre? Firstly, you need to have had an education which makes you excited about the prospect of attending traditional theatre. It is likely that opposition will mention that every child in England is mandated to study at least one Shakespeare text, but the way that these curriculums are taught makes an absolutely huge difference. Pupils in private schools who receive an independent education are much more likely to be able to view traditional theatre rather than just read the scripts. This is because A, they are likely just to be geographically proximate to the theatres, based in capital cities or areas where theatres exist, but even if this is not true, they just have the funds to be able to transport their students much more easily to actually attend and to view these plays. B, there's just a greater amount of funds to pay for or subsidise tickets. In addition to this, children who attend independent schools probably have parents who are willing to pay for them to go and see these works of art, or at least are able to financially support them should that be something the child wishes to do. But C, at the very worst, they just have better funded internal art departments. That is to say, at the very worst, these students in independent schools are just likely to be able to access things like student productions of these plays, whereas in state-funded education, arts funding has been one of the main things which has been cut back thanks to lack of government spending. And that means that individuals in these schools are just completely unable to view any parts of the traditional theatre being portrayed as it was meant to be portrayed. This is important because reading a play will just never give you the same experience as watching it. If I gave you a script of Friends, you wouldn't find it funny. The entertainment comes from the tone used by actors, the physical positioning of actors in the space, or visual cues that come from props and costumes. Shakespeare's Euripides and Lloyd Webber did not write books, they wrote plays. Reading and not watching makes people dismiss this content as boring and creates an elitist structure whereby the people who are interested in consuming it in the first place are people who have had access to an elitist form of education in their past, therefore heightening the discrepancy between these two groups. The second way that having an education is beneficial to understand traditional theatre is through your ability to understand the references which make up such a large part of the plot. When these plays were written, the references contained within them were universal. Imagine Shakespeare plays like Much Ado About Nothing, which is the Tudor equivalent of a pantomime, where satirical jokes were made which everyone in the audience was likely to understand. But now, these references are outdated. You now need to have a decent understanding of history to be able to understand the references which are being made. This can look like an education in classics to understand some of the references in Shakespearean and Greek tragedies, or even just a knowledge of modern history to understand shows like A Streetcar Named Desire, which explores class tensions in 19th century America, or Les Mis, which centres on the French Revolution. A 2021 study by the Council of University Classics Department found significant discrepancies in the availability of classical education between independently and state-educated people. For note, in 2019, just 7% of British students were privately educated, but in that same year, 76% of A-level Latin students, 92% of A-level classical Greek students, and 33% of A-level classic students were privately educated. It's also very clear that people from independent schools are getting better grades than those who study the above subjects in state schools. All of this means that a classical education is just much more available to people who have had a privileged education in their past and therefore are much more able to engage with this content as it was meant to be consumed. Why is having a classical education so important? There are just so many references to the classical world in traditional theatre. See, the myth of Jason and the Argonauts in The Merchant of Venice, the references to the Elysian fields and the Greek god Diogenes in A Streetcar Named Desire, or the comparison drawn between Enjolras and the Greek titan of justice Themis in Les Mis. Understanding these references allows audience to understand the less explicit plot points and develop a deeper and more meaningful connection to the art that they are consuming. People from working class backgrounds frequently report feeling judged or dismissed in traditional spaces, largely because of the prevalent assumption that they are consuming this content wrongly by not having a deep understanding of the underlying tones or examples which are contained within this piece. Opposition might tell you that understanding these references is not essential to enjoying this theatre, but art can still be considered elitist if it provides diametrically different experiences to people of different backgrounds. The environment which is created by a system where some people understand crucial content references and others don't is one where less classically educated people feel shamed and left out. When the room erupts in laughter at a joke you understand, or you feel you've missed out on a plot point because you didn't understand the historical basis behind it, that is when you decide never to return to traditional theatre, because it feels like something which is exclusionary, it feels like something which isn't a place where you are welcome. This is an inherently elitist form of art, because people who come from more socially and economically privileged backgrounds can engage with these plays to a much greater and more fulfilling extent, because traditional theatre offers seriously unequal access to hugely different experiences for different groups, as motion arts.
Miya for her very fine and perfectly timed speech as well. That's incredible. And now cross the table and invite Ava Daniels to come up to the ballot box.
Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, and our worthy opponents, the proposition, tonight we stand firmly against the notion that traditional theatre is elitist. Theatre is not, and has never been, the exclusive playground of the wealthy and privileged. It is a communal art, a mirror to society, and at its very core, a celebration of humanity itself. While some societies in recent centuries have crafted the illusion of theatrical exclusivity, history tells a different story, one of inclusivity, of open doors, and of the people. Today, over the next 10 minutes, I will convince the House of what we believe is a fundamental aspect of traditional theatre, seen throughout time and space. It is inclusive, accessible, and absolutely not elitist. If we consider elitism to mean exclusivity and inaccessibility, as said by the proposition, traditional theatre cannot be considered as such. I would like to present to you two traditional forms of theatre from history, ancient Greek theatre and kabuki theatre, in order to convince you that traditional theatre is not elitist. These two forms of theatres are worlds and centuries apart, crafted by two entirely different cultures and peoples, yet it is undeniable that they show the inclusivity, the accessibility, and the lack of elitism in traditional theatre. Picture this. The sun setting over the great amphitheatre of Dionysus in Athens, thousands of citizens gathered, not just the wealthy, not just the educated elite, but farmers, merchants, labourers, and free citizens from all walks of life. They came not only for entertainment, but because theatre was also considered a civic duty, an integral part of democracy itself. Theatre was developed as part of religious festivals in the 5th century BC, where citizens could come and watch comedies and tragedies alike. How can an art form that was state-sponsored to ensure access for all be considered elitist? Yes, democracy and theatre walked hand in hand. The state sponsored the performances, ensuring that even the poorest citizens could attend. A day's wages were paid to all who attended the theatre. Theatre was not an indulgence for the few, but a vital part of public life for the many. This was not a passive event, but an occasion for the whole community, where the issues of the day were explored and debated through the medium of storytelling. Such a system fundamentally contradicts the notion of exclusivity. This shows that traditional theatre is not elitist, because this form of theatre, arguably the starting point for the evolution of Western theatre, had its existence predicated on the inclusion of the common people. But theatre was not merely a spectacle, it was an intellectual and philosophical experience. The tragedies of the likes of Aeschylus, Sophocles and Euripides grappled with profound moral dilemmas. How should a society treat its leaders? What is justice? What are the consequences of unchecked power? These plays were not written for the aristocrat, but for the entire Athenian citizenry, encouraging them to reflect on their own governance and ethics. Their themes were universal, touching upon human suffering, fate, duty, topics that resonated to every individual regardless of their social standing. The concept of catharsis was also central to Greek theatre, the purgation of negative emotions. This then creates a sense of renewal in the audience, allowing them to become better members of society. If theatre truly only belonged to an elite class, it would not have sought to engage and to educate the entire populace. Theatre contributed to the betterment of society as a whole, therefore we cannot say it is inaccessible or elitist. Moreover, even the seating arrangements of these great theatres tell their own story. The vast majority of the audience consisted of ordinary people. The structures of the theatres themselves, massive open-air amphitheatres, ensured that thousands could attend, fostering a shared cultural and civic experience. There was no velvet curtain separating the rich from the poor, no exclusive membership required. Can an art form so deeply embedded in public life at its origins truly be called elitist? Even the comedic plays of the likes of Aristophanes were rooted in accessibility. His works satirized politicians, mocked societal norms, engaged in sharp social critique. These comedies were raucous, irreverent, designed for mass appeal, hardly the product of an art form designed to exclude the common people. Has anyone here ever read an ancient Greek comedy? If you do, even if you read it and you don't watch it, you'll understand that the humour still lands today. Many of the jokes are slapstick and bawdy. Crass and irreverent as they can be, it is undeniable that this appeals to almost everyone, whether you're in the 5th century BC or the 21st century today. Greek theatre was truly a democratic institution, not just in its content, but in its structure. It was a shared participatory experience, ensuring that citizens could engage with major societal issues through performance. The idea that traditional theatre is inherently elitist crumbles when we examine its origins, which were fundamentally rooted in the principle that theatre was for everyone. But enough about Greek theatre, let us journey to Japan and talk about kabuki theatre. If you think theatre's inclusivity was a Greek anomaly, let me introduce you to the world of kabuki, an art form that burst forth not from the aristocracy, not from the shogunate, but from the bustling streets of Edo period Japan. The origins of kabuki are not in courtly halls, but in riverbanks and marketplaces, where groups of all-female performers began staging colourful and exaggerated performances for the common people. It was raw, it was dramatic, it was fun, and most importantly, it was accessible. People from all walks of life, samurai, merchants, and peasants alike, flocked to see these performances which tackled everything from romance to betrayal to social satire. The humble beginnings of this form of theatre are a testament to how traditional theatre can have its origins anywhere, any place, any time, anyone. Even as the government later restricted female performers and solidified the art form into a men-only domain, kabuki remained an entertainment form for the masses. It embraced the vibrancy of everyday life. It was performed in grand yet welcoming theatres, often once again with ticket pricing systems that ensured affordability for the lower classes. And the actors, they were revered not because they were distant and untouchable, but because they were embraced by the people. The audience cheered, jeered, and even interacted with the performers. This was not an elitist, passive experience, but a collective celebration of storytelling. The performance style itself speaks volumes about its accessibility. Kabuki was exaggerated, vibrant, and thrilling. The actors engaged in dramatic poses that electrified the crowd. Elaborate costumes and bold makeup created visually stunning spectacles. The use of trapdoors, rotating stages, and acrobatics, all things still seen today in modern set design, kept the performances dynamic and engaging. How can an art form that thrives on mass appeal and direct audience engagement be considered elitist? Moreover, the themes of kabuki were not removed from the common man's reality. The stories often depicted the struggles of the everyday person, merchants defying samurai codes, lovers escaping rigid social structures, and heroes emerging from humble beginnings. The emotional depth and relatability of these narratives ensured that audience felt deeply connected with what they were witnessing. Theatre that prioritises the experience of the common people is, by definition, inclusive. If traditional theatre is, by definition, inclusive in this way, then it is also, by definition, not elitist. Theatres themselves were structured to welcome a diverse audience. There were different seating options for various social classes, which made it possible for those with little money to still enjoy a show. Unlike European opera houses that became symbols of aristocratic grandeur during the 18th century, kabuki theatres were raucous, lively, and designed for popular consumption. The audience was an integral part of the performance, shouting praises, calling out actors' names, and actively engaging with the unfolding drama. Kabuki performances could last from sunrise to sunset, with spectators and audience members able to purchase meals and refreshments from local tea houses throughout the day. The experience of watching these types of shows was action-packed, social, and invigorating. We cannot say that these forms of traditional theatre are elitist, because the staging was inviting and inclusive to all. Kabuki's endurance as a popular art form, even in modern Japan, proves its widespread appeal. If an art form remains accessible to all, centuries after its creation, can we still truly call it elitist? We think not. Now, my opponents may argue that some forms of theatre, particularly in the West, have become exclusive. And it may be true that in the last 200 years, industrialization and commercialization have created some barriers in some societies. It is understandable that theatre may be misconstrued as elitist, but this was never the way that traditional theatre was set up, and it does not have to be the way traditional theatre continues to operate today. But let us be clear, this is not the fault of traditional theatre itself. This is the result of shifting economic, class, and societal structures. Theatre was never meant to be an art form for the few. It was hijacked by those who wished to commodify it. The origins of theatre, traditional theatre, seen in both Greece and Japan, as I have spoken about tonight, tells us that theatre was created by the people and for the people. Traditional theatre is not a relic of the privileges. It is the heartbeat of culture, the shared language of storytelling, and above all, an art form that belongs to everyone. If theatre's origins were for the people, why should we let misconceptions of elitism rewrite its history? Theatre, at its core, belongs to everyone. Thank you very much.
And I'll cross the table again and invite Charlotte Rabiei to continue the debate. Here.
Thank you for inviting me here. I'm really grateful. I haven't debated since I was 12, but we'll see how this goes. I'm very invested in this topic, so I think it's a great chance for me to get back into it. A bit background about me. I started doing performing arts classes when I was around 3 years old. I did drama for A-levels, and since joining St Andrews, I've performed in a few plays. I directed a play at the Byre last year, and I'm currently a publicist for a play called Bloodletting, which is out on the 25th and 26th of February. So get your tickets, they're out now. Now, whilst my partner in the proposition, Miya, talked about traditionalist theatre being elitist for theatre viewers, I'm going to focus more on the experience of those wishing to be involved in the theatre making process and how that is inherently elitist. And I should know because I've seen it firsthand. So I'll give you an explanation. Until the age of 16, I attended state schools. My secondary school didn't offer drama as a subject, which is something I constantly protested. They did, however, teach Latin, and I often debated with the teachers why they taught Latin, which is a dead language, and they didn't teach drama, which I thought was a lot more relevant. And they also didn't have the budget to put on plays. We had a musical every other year, and that's just about all they could do. And they said, if you don't like it, just move, and I did. I went to a private school for my last 2 years, and I studied drama there, and it was great. The school's alumni, I might point out, include Hugh Grant and Alan Rickman. So they had a massive drama department. It was a really big thing, and they had the budget to put on multiple plays, musicals, all sorts, every year. It was honestly the dream. And in my A-level drama classes, there were 3 people of note that I'd like to tell you about, these 3 students. One of them was a very, very rich girl. Her dad was the owner of the Ipswich football team, now Premier League team, and she had a limousine drop her off to school every morning. So this was that girl. And then there's a boy who was from Yorkshire, that's all I'm going to tell you about him. And then there was a third boy who, like me, had joined from a state school, and he was on a drama scholarship. And if I were to rank the 3 in terms of how good they were at acting, just from my own opinion, I'd say that that boy on the scholarship was by far the best actor. Like, he was incredible. And then secondly, I'd say the boy from Yorkshire. Thirdly, I'd say the girl. That's not to say that she wasn't good, it's just she was not on the same level. And now, When it came to higher education, all three of these people wanted to go to drama school, but the boy from Yorkshire was convinced by his parents not to. They said, don't do it, go for a real degree, and he was really upset about it. I used to talk with him about it with him for a long time, and he ended up listening to his parents. He went to Cambridge to do psychology. The other two did pursue drama school. They did try their hardest. The boy with the scholarship didn't manage to get into a single one, but the girl got accepted into LAMDA, and she is now currently studying at the Stella Adler Studio of Acting in New York. And now, for those of you who don't know, the Stella Adler Studio is highly prestigious. They accept 28 actors a semester, and its alumni include the likes of Robert De Niro and Marlon Brando. Big deal. I think this is just like a nice little anecdote that shows you the class barriers that come in when people want to enter the arts and succeed in theatre. Unlike in the US, famous British actors are mostly known for being theatrically trained in drama school, but drama school itself marks a barrier to entry into theatre after school education. The most notable drama schools in the UK include LAMDA, RADA, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama, and to apply to drama school in the first place, often you have to perform a Shakespeare monologue. Now, if you don't have experience or training in performing a Shakespeare monologue, which most state school children don't have, they mostly have like just learning of the text itself as opposed to performance experience. That's inherently one border that comes there in the application process. And then even when it comes to going there yourself, a lot of these schools are based in London, so there's a geographical barrier there. Not to mention the cost of living in London and the cost of going to these drama schools. So that's a barrier. And I'm going to talk about some of the actors that we know who are the most recognisable faces in theatre, in British theatre that is. I'm focusing on that in this case. We have Benedict Cumberbatch, we have Eddie Redmayne, Olivia Colman and Judi Dench. Guess what? All of them went to private school. And not just any private school, I'm talking about the most elite, prestigious private schools in the country. Harrow, Eton, the Herodian School. It is in these private schools that children are most encouraged to pursue a career in the arts. A career in the arts is bloody hard. It's freelance work and it's in a really highly competitive field, and nepotism is absolutely rife, and I'm going to get onto nepotism in a bit. The boy from Yorkshire in my drama class loved theatre. He absolutely adored it, but his parents told him not to because of the instability that comes with being in theatre, being an actor, a struggling actor. If you don't have a rich family to fall back on when the work dries up and you're essentially unemployed, you can't afford to be an actor. Luckily for Benedict Cumberbatch, this was not a concern. I'd also like to add that the Cumberbatch family were prolific slave owners in Barbados. Their plantation had 250 slaves, and they were one of the richest families in Britain because of it. That's just a little tidbit. Bearing in mind that the majority of British actors come from a theatrical background, here are some interesting statistics. So the BAFTA-nominated actors are 5 times more likely to have attended private school at 35% compared to the national average of private school attendees at 7%, which is what Miya mentioned. And of the British actors who have gone on to win Oscars, 67% were privately educated. Private school alumni are disproportionately represented as the successful British acting cohort because their parents could afford to support their passion, and they were given educations from well-funded drama departments who encouraged them to engage in the arts. I've spent a good amount of time discussing elitism within the actors, but don't think that this is just exclusive to them. It's also relating to all aspects of theatre making: directing, producing, playwriting. Shakespeare's Globe was the patron of it, King James I. The arts are funded by wealthy, aristocratic, and even monarchical patrons, and always have been. Therefore, having these close ties to people, whether it be because you're related to them or because you grew up in those circles, is crucial in supporting your pursuits of theatre. The biggest name of British theatre today is probably Andrew Lloyd Webber, who went to Westminster School, by the way. I'd like to bring in nepotism now, because I read yesterday an article saying that Tom Fletcher, I don't know if you guys know who he is, he was in the band McFly, his 11-year-old son will be starring in Andrew Lloyd Webber's new play. And here's another layer of nepotism. Tom Fletcher's sister is Carrie Hope Fletcher, a very famous figure in the West End. She's performed in Les Mis, and she is also the star of Andrew Lloyd Webber's other musical, Bad Cinderella, as Cinderella. Cameron Mackintosh, you might not have heard of him, but he is probably the most influential person in the West End, one of the most important theatre producers in the world. He owns 8 of the West End theatres. He's also privately educated, and his mum was a production secretary, introducing him to theatre from a young age. Another huge name in the traditional theatre world, Nicholas Hytner, a renowned theatre director, ex-artistic director of the National Theatre. He's the founder of the Bridge Theatre, where that play, the Jonathan Bailey play that she mentioned, I'm actually going to that one. But yeah, he's also directing that, so I'm going to see what it's like. Anyway, I'll get back to you. Nicholas Hytner was, yes, you guessed it, privately educated. But not only that, his mum is a theatre fundraiser who sits on the board for the Old Vic and for the Royal Court Theatre, which are both staples of London theatre scene. And in relation to the Jonathan Bailey comment, I'd also talk about this aspect of elitism in theatre, because theatre is, for whatever reason, seen as the most pure form of acting in many ways and by many people. So a lot of movie stars who may have started out in theatre like to dabble in plays here and there just to prove their legitimacy as thespians, and not just like a movie star or a TV star. And so these big names attract big audiences and therefore ticket prices rise, but not just because of high demand, but also because these actors obviously demand bigger paychecks. And when a big Hollywood star comes to do a play, the run of the play is typically shorter than a normal play, say like a month long, and this is to accommodate the actor's busy schedule. And this of course makes the tickets more exclusive. Finally, the abundance of famous established actors doing plays in the West End creates reduced availability of roles for other actors. A-list actors tend to choose roles that exist within this sort of unofficial canon of traditional theatre. For example, almost all the men will pretty much do a Shakespeare, like a Macbeth or Hamlet or King Lear at some point in their careers, just to say they've done it, or a Tennessee Williams play or something. These actors lean more towards those traditional roles because they want to be able to prove themselves as real actors, reducing the opportunity for lesser known actors to inhabit these important roles in larger theatrical productions. The traditional theatre can also be defined by the theatrical spaces in which plays are performed. As such, there are three famous theatres: the Gielgud Theatre, the Olivier Theatre, and the Novello Theatre, that I'm going to talk about because they're named after three principal figures in traditional theatre in the UK: John Gielgud, Laurence Olivier, and Ivor Novello. John Gielgud's father was a count in Lithuania who married into the Terry family, which is a dynasty of acting heritage that began in the early 19th century. Gielgud, of course, attended private school. He went to Westminster School, just like Andrew Lloyd Webber, where he said that he had access to the West End in time to touch the fringe of the great century of the theatre, so direct access to the theatre. Laurence Olivier also attended private school, where he performed Puck in A Midsummer Night's Dream, after which his brother went to India. He wanted to go with his brother to India, but his dad said, "No, don't be such a fool, you're not going to India, you're going to the stage." His father told him to go to the Central School of Speech and Drama, the famous drama school. And Olivier said that in his memoir that his sister had already gone to that school and she was the principal's favourite. So Olivier speculated in his memoir if it was because of his sister's connections that he managed to get into the school. Ivor Novello's mother was a singing teacher through which he met a bunch of other performers. He was privately educated and he found a mentor in Sir Edward Marsh, a patron of the arts, and Winston Churchill's secretary, actually. And it was Marsh who encouraged him to pursue the arts and so on. I'm trying to explain here through these examples how the biggest names in theatre, the faces of the West End, both of the past and the present, who represent traditional theatre as we have defined it, to have benefited from the elitism inherent to the theatre world. I'll end my statement with this: the privilege of accessibility through wealth, education, through family connections, through close proximity to the epicentre of traditional British theatre is a barrier to entry for the vast population that do not have access to this privilege. Therefore, traditional theatre is very much elite.
Charlotte for that fine speech, and now cross the table again and welcome Ben Connaughton to continue the debate for the side opposition. Hear, hear!
"Villain, I have done thy mother" is a Shakespeare quote, by the way. I thought I might start with that one. I think we're too quick to judge the theatre industry. It's easy to imagine a dark auditorium filled with wealthy, white, mostly male patrons laughing at some sophisticated joke that the rest of us just don't get. But that's not the case, and my aim here is to shine a light on the realities of the theatre industry, which I would disagree with the proposition that is exclusive to Shakespeare and legacy playwrights. Especially because the Sigourney Weaver play that you mentioned just now, she's playing a man, and I think any traditionalist would be up in arms about that. So I would take traditional theatre to be plays and musicals in a brick and mortar theatre. So in contrast to newer products that we're seeing like NT Live and NT at Home, where where theatre products are put into cinemas or on a streaming platform, for example. Thank you. So I'd like to talk about who our audience is, what are the practical ways that theatres work to be more diverse, equitable and inclusive workspaces, and what social roles do theatres play in our communities. So starting with the financial side, the first misconception is that theatres are just for the financial elite, and the headlines are tempting. They tell us that the top ticket prices have risen by 21% post-pandemic, which is true, and that rightly gives us pause. But the the greater truth is that low ticket prices have remained the same. So the ceiling is rising, but the average and the low ticket prices are staying the same. So for in London's West End, you can see a play for £23, which is not, for the vast majority of people, a limiting factor. And charitable organisations like the National Theatre, Royal Shakespeare Company and the Globe Theatre, there's a huge number of tickets on sale for just £5 and £10. In fact, last financial year, 35% of the tickets at the National Theatre were sold for less than £20. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I went to see Twelfth Night at the Royal Shakespeare Company, and they'd partnered with TikTok to supply £10 tickets for under 25-year-olds with the express interest of developing their audiences. Now, of course, we're not blind to the fact that theatres appeal to wealthy people. Everyone loves a good show. So in reality, there is a balance to be struck. So the National Theatre, for example, it's a not-for-profit, and about a third of its operating budget comes from donations from wealthy people. So on the one hand, we have members-only events. We do have a very active development team, and we have to cozy up to the wealthy people. But the reason we do that is to fulfill our mission of bringing theatre to everyone. It's with that balance that allows us to take from the financial elite, if you like, and supply £5 and £10 tickets to those that actually need them so that they can access the theatre. In terms of inclusivity, equity, diversity barriers, I think the theatre industry is one which actively breaks down those barriers and champions DEI in terms of the people that we employ, the stories that we tell, and the audiences that we reach. So, for example, gender neutral and colour neutral casting is now commonplace. The NT staged a production last year, for example, about Aneurin Bevan, the founder of the NHS, and Winston Churchill was played by an Asian man. And that went with huge financial success. They've sold £4.5 million worth of tickets. So it is possible to do that in a commercially viable way. And even fully commercial theatres do this. So, for example, Operation Mincemeat, which Proposition mentioned, has actors playing male roles 1 minute and female roles the next. So the people that are on British stages reflect the British population, and there's no barriers to entry, for example, non-binary and trans people. But it's not just about the stage, of course. Leadership within the theatre industry is important as well, and that's equitable as well. So there's this misconception that the theatre industry is dominated by men. So of those three cornerstone charitable theatres I mentioned, the RSC, the NT and the Globe, they're all run either fully or jointly by women. So for example, the Globe's artistic director is Michelle Terry. The RSC is jointly run by Tamara Harvey and Daniel Evans, and the NT is jointly run by Kate Vara and Rufus Norris, who, by the way, I know you mentioned a previous NT director, but Rufus is a working class man, and he went to public school. So further, theatres are committed to hiring diverse and equitable workforces. So for example, again, 18% of the NT staff are from the global majority, over half are female, that's equitable. And the NT and the Royal Shakespeare Company are disability confident employers, which means that if someone is a disabled applicant and they meet the necessary criteria for the job application, they'll get an interview. Similarly, like the RSC runs trans awareness programs, and there are a host of DEI programs within theatres. In terms of the stories we choose to tell, I don't believe there's an intellectual elitism there. In fact, dozens of plays in the West End are part of mainstream brands that have mass appeal. So for example, there's Percy Jackson, The Devil Wears Prada, Stranger Things, Back to the Future, Mean Girls, Mrs. Doubtfire, Fawlty Towers, Clueless, Great Gatsby, Benjamin Button, all building on brands that are recognisable and that don't require that step in terms of understanding them. They apply to a mass market. And as for the new plays coming out, there's no limit in the variety of subject matter. We're seeing more non-heterosexual love stories, more stories about non-traditional family structures, more working class stories. And the third component of inclusion, I believe, is the people we tell our stories to. So who are our audiences? Of course, captioned, signed, audio-described, relaxed performances are now industry standard. So the ability is not a factor, a limiting factor. Many shows run touch tours as well for the visually impaired, where they can come on set and sort of in a tactile way experience the world of the play. We also have, we're breaking down barriers in other ways. So for example, the National Theatre now runs earlier performance times in the evening. So that, for example, allows parents with young children to get home earlier at night, or commuters to catch the last bus home. So there are lots of different ways that we're strategically breaking down barriers to entry. And finally, I'd like to talk about the place that theatres have in society. So, of course, they have a sweeping impact. They're places of inspiration and activism and reflection. But on an individual scale, theatres themselves are pillars of local communities. So take, for example, the Byre Theatre. It's not just a place where you go and see plays. It's where you study, you have committee meetings, you go on coffee dates to film festivals where you rehearse. It's a home of community groups. Children get their first time on stage in pantomimes where people get married. And that's not unique to the Byre. Up and down the country, theatres are pillars of their communities, and they have social missions. So for example, there's a network of theatres in England. They are targeted in low-income communities, and the theatres there have a social mission to engage communities. On a similar vein, the Royal Shakespeare Company is a registered research organisation, so it has a research programme into how to use innovative teaching methods in classrooms that incorporate drama and break down intellectual and ability barriers into English drama, PSHE education. The National Theatre, again, is a place of education. So it has a cohort of T-level high school students. So that's high school students that come, and instead of doing their A-levels, they'll come and learn vocational skills, for example, construction, building services, engineering, and that sets their way onto apprenticeships. The NT and theatres around London also host apprentices where you can practice your craft and your trade. And this sort of educational side is true of commercial theatre as well. So, for example, everybody's talking about Jamie, which is a West End musical. That gives free lesson plans to teachers for PSHE classes, for drama and English classes, that build on the play and democratise the experience of theatre, so independent of how much the schools themselves can afford it. So I think theatres share knowledge, they champion inclusion, they're places where we can go see stories that help us understand what we haven't experienced, and I therefore believe that they are not elitist. Thank you very much.
For that excellent speech, and to all of our speakers for what so far has been an excellent debate. So now we have some time to hear from you. If you've not been to one of our public debates before, this is your opportunity to stand up and speak for up to 2 minutes about what you think about the debate. You can address any questions to our speakers, pick up on something that they've raised, something that you think that they should have discussed but haven't, or just your own point of view. We do have a prize as well this evening for the best floor speech. It will be a voucher for Toppings Bookshop. Very coveted. So without any further ado, any speeches from the floor? Just here, everybody please stand and state your name for the minutes.
Hello everyone, I'm Ray. So I'd like to point out that I think the opposition has fundamentally confounded the definition raised by the proposition. The proposition has made crystal clear that traditional theatre is defined by the long history and heritage instead of any given form of artistic contents. So the Greek tragedy that you'll be mentioning about weren't traditional theatre at the time they were written, because the content and the jokes in those theatres were relevant at that time, but they are no longer relevant at our current time. So, which means that has caused, that is where exclusivity and elitism come from, because those jokes and banterings are no longer relevant. Now we need to have more formal and often private education to know and understand them. So now I will briefly address the two examples I've raised. The first is Greek tragedies. As I've just mentioned, they were not traditional theatre at the time, they were relevant. And the second example you raised is Japanese kabuki theatre, which I think is an utterly confounded conception again. I've been to Japan, I watched kabuki theatre myself, and I can speak for certainty that they are not any certain types of play. They are a form of artistic expressions, just as plays. They don't refer to any particular kabuki plays. And in fact, most popular kabuki plays are modern plays, just as modern plays, in just normal English plays. So even if they are the older plays, the reason they've been popular now is because they are adapted with modern Japanese language, so they can engage with a wider audience. I also want to briefly address second speakers. You'll be talking about the EDI project. I don't see how that's relevant to make the contents more inclusive. Surely you can find black, Asian, or white to perform as Hamlet, Othello, or Macbeth, but that doesn't make their lines more easier to understand by the general public. So I don't see that's how that makes traditional theatre less elitistic. Thank you very much.
Rabiei, other speeches from the floor. Yes, just here. Please stand and state your name for the minutes.
Hi, my name is Eli. I must say I'm disappointed by this debate. I was hoping that with theatre practitioners on the panel we were going to hear an interesting philosophical debate about how different types of theatre come to become dominant and suggest specific methodologies and specific content that is allowed, and this is then elitist both for practitioners and in terms of audience members, what they're able to access. I was hoping for a comparative analysis against fringe theatre, and I'm very disappointed that we never heard any examples of what would not be traditional theatre. With this in mind, I'd like to quickly discuss the differences in how the scope of the debate was framed and why I'm not really sure which side I would vote for, because everyone was talking about different things. So our proposition first speaker came up and started telling us that traditional theatre is works of art, very specifically, not the institutions, and that these works of art are only traditional because they have become household names. One of my issues with the points that followed is that the arguments you made about education and about access and what plays theatres are going to put on relied on a subset of those works of art. You were talking mostly about Shakespeare. I can tell you right now that works like Tom Stoppard's work, which is absurdist work and fairly difficult to read, is just as difficult for most high schoolers as is Shakespeare, but it's not written in Shakespearean English, and I'm fairly certain it wouldn't fit your definition of traditional theatre. If it would, there are other absurdist works that are less mainstream that I don't think would fit that definition and would be similarly difficult. I don't think that your scope was clear enough to make sure that your arguments actually worked. What we then got from the first speaker for opposition was, again, a mismatch of scope. You were talking about what used to be the state of the theatre, and unfortunately that just placed you completely outside of what was happening for the rest of the debate. From the second speakers of both sides, we got a more interesting institutional analysis, and I really like that. I hope that the rebuttal will continue on those lines. And from the proposition, I'd like to hear an interaction with the specific policy that was given by the opposition, because I think that this does contend with the examples that you gave, and this is where the real crux of the debate happened. Opposition, I'd like an extension on specific practitioners and education and how that affects the ability of people to access traditional theatre. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to Eli. It's always good to get some pushback from the floor. Any other floor speeches this evening? Yes, at the back over here. Please stand and state your name for the minutes.
Hi, I'm Alex. So what I'm going to speak about is from my heart, from my own experience. I grew up in a state school and have only ever been to a state school in East London. I'm not from the most wealthy of areas, but growing up, I went to see Shakespeare twice at the Globe, and that opportunity was because of the cheap tickets that I had access to. And not only the cheap tickets that I had access to through the school, but also the cheap transport that TfL provided for me to get there. Now the issue with this is that was because I was in London. the accessibility of getting somewhere like the Globe, or getting to places that perform acts of Shakespeare or more traditional acts, was very limited for other friends to have up and down the country. That they haven't enjoyed that same ability. And this is where I support the proposition in it being elitist, that there wasn't that accessibility for me growing up. And this was as someone that was growing up not studying drama, a history student, having little connection, and that's why I think that the proposition is correct, as this is elitist due to lack of accessibility. Thank you.
We have time for 2 more speeches, so I think we'll go at the back with you, and welcome back.
Hi, my name's Ewan. I would love to live in the world that opposition lives in. I think it'd be fantastic. I would love to live in a world where everyone is within walking distance of an open-air amphitheatre, and everyone has the 2 shillings to buy a ticket to the light. Unfortunately, we do not live in that world, despite how lovely it sounds. I think one of the main issues I had with the opposition, which leaves me with a few questions at the end, is actually how do you define accessibility in the theatre industry, and in especially the culture of traditional theatre. I think it's fantastic that things like the National Theatre and the Globe have, as a previous speaker said, they have all of these initiatives to get state school people and other people into the theatre. That is fantastic. However, when we look at things like physical accessibility, I know the second opposition speaker talked about things like relaxed plays and touch stores. This is fantastic if the only relaxed play wasn't on a Tuesday matinee on a random day halfway through the tour. That's inaccessible to most people. Especially when we look at people getting into the theatre, most times it is as a young person. You are relying on your family's income and your family's priorities to have that income. You can't really get into the theatre at 30 years old because you've already passed that and you've already probably made those decisions in your head that actually theatre is not for me. I never really understood Shakespeare when I did it for GCSE, so I'm not really going to bother. I think to have an accessible theatre culture, it has to start early. It has to start with physical accessibility. It has to start with actual understandable and passionate teachers. All of these things are not made available. It's fantastic if you have disability and equal job applications to theatre companies. We should have those for sixth forms. We should have those for drama schools. You will not apply to a job that maybe is great and is successful for you if you do not have access to the training to get said job.
We're being read to filth this evening. Okay, we have time for one final speech, probably from board. So Alex and Jack, rock, paper, scissors.
Does that mean I can go because they drew? I mean,
it's not that hard. So insane.
Great.
I think that 3 metrics for elitism have been given to us so far by government very specifically, whether it's educationally elitist, monetarily elitist, or whether the actors themselves are elites. And there's been quite a bit from other speeches on the content of theatre, but I think the first 2, like the second 2 arguments suffer from a somewhat fundamental flaw. And that is that opposition have already pointed out that there are cheap tickets exist. But going beyond that, I think the image problem that theatre has actually belies a factor which makes it quite similar to any other industry or entertainment form. Seeing a world-renowned artist at Wembley is going to break the bank for most people. I don't think that makes jazz night at the Union elitist. I think that football season tickets for Premier League clubs cost thousands and thousands of pounds that most working class people can't afford. But seeing a local team is relatively cheap and accessible to anyone that wants to go and see football. The point, I think, is that any activity has aspects which are aimed at and consumed by elites, and aspects which are aimed at and consumed by working class people. It's easy for us to point to the best theatre, because if anything is true in this debate, it's probably that the media and the way that it talks about theatre is quite elitist, but the actual thing itself and the way that it exists, and the way that the people going to it, watching it, and enjoying it, actually experience it, is not. And I think that those ought to be differentiated between. Traditional theatre does exist at the West End. It also happens at my local theatre, at my state school theatre. It happens at Shakespeare in the Park, which is sometimes free to attend, right? This isn't the case this isn't just the case for people going, but for the actors themselves as well. Most Shakespeare in the Park actors are not full-time, qualified professional actors who've gone to theatre school, but they're still able to access Shakespeare plays, to perform them, and to access and have fun and enjoy traditional theatre. As an industry, perhaps theatre as a whole is elitist, but traditional theatre itself, specifically traditional theatre, as an entertainment form, I don't think it actually is elitist. I think it's just vibes.
Okay, thank you everyone for your contributions from the floor this evening. Very interesting. Congratulations to all those making their debut floor speech this semester. We will announce the winner of the best floor speech at the end of the debate, but for now we're going to come back to the table and give our speakers some opportunities to kind of respond to your cutting comments from the floor. We're going in reverse order, so we'll start with the opposition. Have you decided how you're splitting your time? Are we 50-50?
We're 50-50. Why not?
Yeah, so 5 minutes each, so we'll welcome Ben back.
Great, thank you for your comments. I hopefully I'm going to address some of them head on. So, okay, going back to the proposition's definition of traditional theatre then being Shakespeare and legacy playwrights, products that I earlier excluded, like National Theatre at Home and National Theatre Live, then qualify as traditional theatre. So putting Shakespeare on a streaming service or in a cinema where you pay £10 max to get into a cinema, or a National Theatre at Home, plug, you pay £10 and you have access to 100 plays that you can watch. So that's sort of point one. Second point one is there's this idea that grand London theatre is the only way to see Shakespeare, and that the Tom Hiddlestons are dominating Shakespeare. That's just not true. The Edinburgh Fringe Festival has over 3,000 shows each August. There's a really vibrant pub theatre scene in Glasgow, in Manchester, in London, where you go upstairs and it's 20 seats and you have a pint and you watch Hamlet. And if anything, the smaller theatre companies and the smaller theatres are more inclined to put on Shakespeare because they know it always sells pretty well. So I don't think this idea that you need to go to London to see Shakespeare is true. Second, addressing your points there about EDI, I accept that those policies don't change the contents of what is on stage. But in terms of accessibility for the actors, we talked about how competitive as an actor it is to get in. They give a wealth of new opportunities where previously people were cut out. And same for the behind the scenes, for the stage managers, producers, directors. On your point though about the contents of the plays, now when Shakespeare, for example, is being performed, it's often cut down. Some of the references are changed. In the example I gave the other day about Twelfth Night, they played modern pop songs. They made modern references to capture that spirit of, at the time they would have got the references. The work of Shakespeare is not it's not set in stone. It's not a monolith in the way that you might think it is. People adapt it, people change it, and it is now sort of palatable for a modern audience and continues to be. There's a reason it's still so popular. I apologise. I think it was possibly yourself that asked about education. So to chat a little bit about education and Shakespeare. The NT did a schools tour of Hamlet a couple of years ago, so they cut it right down to an hour and toured it through lots of schools in low-income areas. It was a great program. Similarly, yeah, you get free resources for teachers. The NT has an entire learning department where they work with schools to put theatre in schools, so that it doesn't, it's not just the private schools getting access to theatre. And again, with that network of theatres that I mentioned, they exist in Leeds, in Manchester, in Yorkshire, and when I talked about engaging with local communities, that includes the local schools. So they do subsidised tickets for schools, they do schools performances, that kind of thing. And yourself about physical accessibility, that's an excellent point. Often in a run of plays you might have one or two captioned performances. I absolutely concede that point. I think we need to do a lot better with physical barriers to theatre. What I would say is actually the technology does exist to get over that. Two examples. So one, at the bloody NT again. Yeah, where does he work? We have a bit of tech called smart caption glasses. So users can put on a pair of glasses. It's kind of like Google Glasses, and the captions are presented on the glasses. So you don't need to specifically go to a caption performance for that. It's available at all performances. And similarly, you can get audio described headsets that allow you to attend any performance. That's true as well at the Globe and the RSC. I think we just need to do a better job of rolling it out into all theatres. And I think that's all I want to say. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. It's now time to welcome back Ava to conclude the debate for side opposition.
First of all, thank you to the... Oh, I'm not timing myself, sorry. First of all, thank you to those floor speeches. I have never debated in my life, so I've been really fascinated by understanding what's going on today. This has really taught me a lot about debating. My background is I am a scholar of world theatre. That is the background that I have over the last 10 years. And I also want to touch a little bit about adaptations and new imaginings and the modernisation of theatre. Some theatre is for elites, and there are aspects of theatre for the elites, and there are aspects for others of more familiar backgrounds. I hope that was clear in our speeches at the opposition. Newer audiences, I fear, also face the same problems of perhaps not understanding forms of traditional theatre. But I want to use a little personal anecdote of what I have learned tonight at this debate. The reason why I mention I have never debated before is because I entered this wanting to educate myself about this art form, because my understanding of debate before this evening was only about the Parliament or the United Nations. My understandings from the debate tonight is that there are forms of debate that are for higher-ups, and there are debate forms, like these public debates here at the Union, which make them accessible for other people. And I think this can be the same way with theatre. There are forms of theatre that are perhaps seen as people aren't able to understand them. There are perceptions of these things. But, as my second speaker talked about, there are forms of theatre that bring traditional theatre to normal people, to people who maybe can't afford them, to people from places of the world who can't access them through things like streaming. And in the same way that I have tonight learned all about debating, I joined this debate purely just because I wanted to learn about it. I hope that theatre can become more accessible, and I hope that the perception of it being elitist can be stopped through methods of bringing traditional theatre to the public. Thank you.
To opposition. We're now going to cross the table again and invite Charlotte to come back to the ballot box. Here.
So I want to address a few things that were mentioned. I think a lot of the stuff that was said by the second opposition regarding all the stuff that is being brought in, diversity, accessibility, all of that stuff, I think that is all a reaction to the existing elitism that is there, and it's all a very new thing, so I don't think it sort of goes with the notion of tradition. I think, let me just double check, is it Eli who brought up the traditional theatre? You mentioned Tom Stoppard and about like sort of fringe theatre. I would actually say that someone like a Beckett, I'd say that they have, maybe originally it wasn't a part of like the canon. I would say it now has become a part of that canon and does sort of exist within that traditional theatre realm. Like you'll see, what's that play called? Waiting for Godot. That's one of the most popular plays that they put on every bloody year, and it typically has like an A-list actor starring in it. So I'd say that, although it may not, like the form itself of the play might not necessarily be traditional in the sense of like a Shakespeare play, I think the way it's been received within the theatre community and how it's sort of been welcomed within that canon sort of makes it part of that tradition. And what else would I say? The bit that Louise mentioned about how a lot of these plays are sort of critiquing the elite, and how that sort of juxtaposes the idea of it being elitist. I think that's just one of the greatest ironies of it all, really. Shakespeare was critical of the kings, but he was also being paid by the king, so you know, you can do both at the same time. I think that's a big part of it. Most of the time I go to plays, it's about 80% old people, old white people that are in the audiences. So sure, they might be nodding their heads and agreeing with this incredibly leftist speech that's being given on stage, but at the end of the day, they're voting Lib Dem. You know what I mean? And I think what's crucial is the culture of like traditional theatre. I think it was Ewan who mentioned that, the culture of it, and I think that is what's crucial. Sure, there may be all these new things that are coming in recently. I think the actual buildings themselves of a lot of these like old theatres they're not built to have to deal with accessibility issues like physical mobility problems. A theatre like the National Theatre is a lot more capable of dealing with that because of just how big it is and, you know, all the resources that they have and whatnot. And I think I wrote in bold here, culture, image, narrative. And I think that's just my main point really, is the culture of traditional theatre, the image of traditional theatre to the average person is that of elitism. Even if that necessarily isn't the case, that's true, they do have cheaper tickets. I know, I'm constantly searching for them. I'm always on those sites trying to refresh. Like on Wednesdays, if you go in at 10 a.m, then you'll be in the queue to get a £5 ticket. If you're under 25 for this, that, whatever. They have all these little schemes, which are great. They really are. Most people don't know about them. Most people don't care about them because they haven't been brought up in the thing about it being from a young age. That is crucial. Like if you got into theatre at a young age, then you're probably going to stay into it. That's your thing. But the average 35-year-old doesn't even know about this, doesn't care for it because they were never sort of invited into that world. And I think I might leave it at that. But yeah, thank you.
I'd now like to invite Miya back to conclude the debate as a whole. Here.
Okay, I'm going to do my best to respond to everything, but I am not a responsive speaker by trade, so sorry if I get some things wrong. I'd firstly just like to note we have quite a few sneaky ideas about what is meant by traditional theatre coming out of both of the opposition speakers. I just want to address two of them to begin with. Firstly, I think we've successfully rebuked the idea that we were talking about how theatre was successfully performed in the time that it was initially written, but let's just note that as sort of an additional way to think about this is just because an institution was founded on a specific principle doesn't mean we can't criticise it in the here and the now if it fails to abide by that principle. For example, parliaments were set up to make sure that they were equitable to everybody. Does that mean that we can no longer criticise Parliament for having an unequal makeup of the people who attend it? Like, no, these institutions might have been created with a particular aim and goal, but now in the here and now, like, we can criticise them for not abiding by that sort of founding principle. Secondly, on the idea that traditional theatre can be changed, this is a real sort of Odysseus' ship moment. If a Hamlet play is cut down to 1 hour and all of the parts are changed and the lines are changed and the references are changed, is it still Hamlet? I think this is quite an interesting philosophical idea, so I'm willing to debate this in the pub later. But even if this is the same play, our analysis about why people are still unwilling to engage in it in the first place still stands here. Not my analysis on education literally undercuts all of the content we hear from opposition about access to begin with. So even if it is true that it's incredibly easy to go and see these plays, if you haven't been brought up in a culture, as my partner notes, where you're encouraged to care about these plays in the first place, you're just never going to bother, so it doesn't matter if they're accessible. Okay, on floor speeches, I'm going to start with Jack. So Jack tells us that the best parts of theatre may be elitist, but the other parts are not. But for that to be true, the opposition would need to have proved a complete and unambiguous access to lower forms of the theatre. But my analysis has already explained to you why the only places that these plays are put on is in major capital cities or major metropolitan hubs, in grand theatres which are just traditionally inaccessible, both because of the monetary value associated with them, but also the physical inability of these spaces to be accessible to a majority of people. So this doesn't really play out in the critical and scathing way in which it was delivered. Sorry, Jack. And then on Eli's point, I think you're completely right that this debate suffered from a lack of reference to many modern works of art. And I think you were interesting to point out that the scope of our sort of setup was not clear enough to make our arguments relevant. But I think I would push back here and say that most works of art can be considered elitist. Indeed, my definition of traditional is that works can become traditional over time. So if a surrealist work of art has existed in theatre for a very long time, has an extended run, and is particularly popular, I think that probably does count as elitist and does count as traditional. Now, for all of my arguments still apply to this point. Do I have any other things to say on people's floor speeches? I don't think so. Thank you for everyone who gave them passionately in defence. Otherwise, Sorry. Moving on then to some direct responses to the other speakers. I think we hear a lot of really good content about how individual theatres are making a great effort to include more and more people into the sort of realms of the people who are accessible and able to go and watch these pieces of sort of art. I think the first thing I'd say is these theatres just unfortunately don't have the money to make this equitable to every single person. Giving reduced tickets in the sort of era of artistic funding cuts that I characterised in my speech, it's just not possible for every single person, every single theatre all of the time. So there does still exist a significant monetary barrier to people accessing these traditional works of art. But this also just doesn't tackle the issues that we speak about on geographical inequality. Thank you to the floor speech for raising this issue, because I do think that this is still pervasive. I'd just like to turn then also to some of the attacks that we hear to my partner's case, saying things like we have women who are in charge of these theatres, and we have a lot of accessible performances with things like colourblind casting and all these sorts of things. So this is excellent. But to use another political example, we've had female prime ministers, but it doesn't mean that women don't face issues in politics in general right now. We can have people at the top of these industries who come from all walks of life. It doesn't change the fact that for a majority of people it is still inaccessible. Then we hear some again, very motivating and reassuring content about how these theatres are sort of willing to employ people who are disabled or give them access to greater job opportunities. This is excellent, but when the cheapest tickets at the Globe Theatre require people to stand for 3 hours at a time, I'm not sure how these performances can still be considered accessible to a majority of people, or indeed just to people with like young children or families. It's still inaccessible to a majority of people. On the content of education, again, very enlightening and very exciting, but for teachers who just don't have the time to perform these sorts of educational opportunities in their classes because they're too busy trying to help students who don't know how to read or write because they come from a background where education just hasn't been prioritised, I'm still not sure why artistic education is something which is prioritised or even particularly accessible. Yeah, I think that's everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Miya and indeed to all of our wonderful speakers this evening. It is now time to call the House to a vote. So if you agree with the motion and side with the proposition, i.e. you believe the motion that this House believes that traditional theatre is elitist, please raise your hand now. Okay.
Very thorough.
Yeah? Oh, okay, wonderful. And all those who side with the opposition, i.e. you disagree with the motion and you don't think that traditional theatre is elitist, please raise your hands now.
That was a quicker count.
Okay, and any abstentions?
Ooh, What's that? Never.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so before we announce the winner of tonight's debate, we have a couple of announcements from board and from Mermaids as well. We will start with Alex, our Chair of Ways and Means.
Right, hello everyone, I'm Alex. I'm in charge of these events, the public debates. First of all, thank you very much to our speakers for what has been a very good debate. I hope everyone enjoyed it despite any, I'm sure, minor disappointments. I see some familiar faces and I'm all glad that you're back, and I also see some new faces. I really hope you had a good time tonight, because we run these every week and we have a variety of topics. Now, next week is a very exciting one. We're not doing a debate for a change, we're doing a panel. We have a great array of academics coming over to talk about the new Trump administration, which I'm sure is going to be a topic of interest for many of us, given the bleak situation at the moment. I think that's everything. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Chief Whip for competitive.
Hi, my name is Neva. I help run competitive debating with a lovely subcom. And if you really liked tonight's debate, you thought, I would like to do way more of that all of the time. We run trainings every Wednesday at 2, top floor of the Union, and we also run competitions, some of which are coming up are in St Andrews. You don't even have to go anywhere. You should sign up for that if you're interested.
Can we go to Stuart for social updates.
Hi, I'm Ariel, I'm the steward, and if you wish this conversation would never end and keep talking about it, come with us after tonight to our pub social that follows every Thursday debate. Instead of being the Beacon, for a change, surprisingly, we will be in Bruco this week due to a booking mishap. And unfortunately, will not be a particularly accessible venue this time due to the stairs. But come along, there's £100 bar tab, so like, come on. I know, it's treating you guys this week. And keep tuned, as this new semester means we'll have a lot more new and exciting socials coming along too. So come along and chat about the theatre.
Okay, thank you, Ariel. And then Louise, did you want to come up and say a few words?
Yes, I'm going to do something. Hi everyone, I'm Louise. I am the performing arts professor and the president of Mermaids. First of all, thank you so much everyone for coming, and thank you to UDS for helping us put on this amazing debate. It's been so much fun. It's the first UDS Merms Club, I think, if not ever, in a very long time there have been, so yay to that. Yeah, if you're interested in theatre, I see some familiar faces here, thank you. But if you're interested in theatre and want to get involved more, there's many ways. If you just want to watch theatre, we have 7 shows. That's 6. 7 Mermaids shows this semester alone, but on top of that, there's musicals, there's operettas, and more. So there's so much to see. Go to Mermaids Instagram if you want to see more of that. But we also have what we call the Freshest Drama Festival coming up next week, where there's loads of really exciting events. There are free and open to all. There's lighting workshops, creative intention workshops, production management, sound workshops, etc., etc. That will be really, really interesting. So if you're interested in anything of that, please do come along. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed tonight, and thank you.
Thank you very much to Louise and for indeed everyone on Mermaids that's helped to make tonight possible. Again, I think it is probably the first collaboration, if not ever, in a very long time. We're also doing 2 other collaborations with other societies this semester, so do keep an eye on our website and on our Instagram as well, because there's lots coming up to get involved with. The only other things from me really this evening is just to say a very warm welcome back to all of those who have joined us before, and welcome to those of you if it's your first time at these debates. Just to reiterate some of what Alex has already said, we do these debates every single week and they are free. We are the only university debating society in the country that still does these debates weekly for free, completely for free. So please do come along and make the most of it. Bring someone if you think that they might be interested. And it's lovely to see so many of you all here this evening. Also, if you think that someone may have been interested in this debate that didn't get the opportunity to watch it, it will hopefully be put up on our YouTube as well shortly. So to keep an eye out to that too. The final thing is just to say congratulations to Ian. This was his first time sergeanting this evening. Accurate counter, which I appreciate. Okay, so without further ado, it's time to announce the winner of the Best Floor Speech Prize. But before I do, I would like to have a couple of honourable mentions, which are for Eli and Ewan. Congratulations, you both spoke very well. Ultimately, we decided to give the prize for the Best Floor Speech this evening to Ray. So congratulations. So without further ado, it's time to announce the. Oh, you can sit back down. You will get the prize. I don't have it on me. So to announce the winner of the debate this evening. So the ayes to the right were 40, and the nays to the left were 14, and the abstentions were 9. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Congratulations.